Welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell. And this podcast goes deep into the collision of big tech
and the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative journalist.
I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light.
Over years covering the collision of big tech and big media, a recurring theme for me has been the constant willingness of the masses to look the other way. Yeah, they know it's harmful, they know it's commercializing kids, they know they're being stalked for data, but somehow billions of people seem to think the everyday usefulness of social media means they'll accept it. And that's always shocked me. Only a few times have I really seen people stop and consider whether they need to change their behavior. And one of those occasions was Cambridge Analytica. When that scandal happened, people and politicians all over the world suddenly realized that Meta had the power to destabilize society. Then the Facebook papers from Frances Haugens, and we saw what really goes on behind those friendly logos, and that scared people too. The recent testimony of another whistleblower, Sarah Wynne Williams, gave to Congress suggested that Zuckerberg was willing to sell US companies down the river to China to win favor. That also rattled people. But this week, I experienced something completely new. Even here in Australia, where I live, people stopped me in the street to ask about the revelations published by a reporter who's joining us today. Reuters journalist Jeff Horowitz revealed how engineers have been teaching Meta's AI, which includes how to have an intimate conversation with a child, how to issue or handle issues of race, and what levels of violence an artificial intelligence might be allowed to create. Jeff, that's a big story. Thank you very much indeed for joining Alan and I today. I wonder if we could begin by the story. Okay, can you tell me a little bit about the story, what you wrote, and why you think it's so important, and which bits of it matter most to you?
This is a story fundamentally about responsible design, or perhaps lack of it. The basics are that we got a hold of Meta's internal guidelines for chatbot conversations. Now, as this document states, it's not supposed to be laying out the ideal answers, but just kind of what's in the field of what's allowed. So there'd be kind of the rules, and then there'd be examples that go along with them saying, this is an acceptable conversational response to this prompt. This is an unacceptable response. And I think the top line thing from that document that people sort of were most surprised by was that the document, which was approved by Meta's legal, policy, engineering teams, as well as its chief ethicist, did state that it is acceptable to engage a child in conversations that are romantic or sensual. And just in case there's any lack of clarity as to what that means, it offered a number of examples, which it deemed, say, telling a high school student, "What are we doing tonight, my love?" The answer to that would be, "I take your hand and lead you to the bed, our bodies entwine." There was another one in which an 8-year-old of unspecified gender has taken off its shirt, and it is acceptable per this document for the chatbot to tell it that its body is a work of art. Per the accompanying explanation, it's okay to evidence the attractiveness of a minor under the age of 13. So this is weird, and when I brought this to Meta's attention, that I had it, Meta said it was an error, and that these were examples that should not have been in the document. They were a misinterpretation of Meta's policies, and that they would be struck. But I think the thing that's interesting here is that these were in the documents for months, and this was an operational document. This is stuff that was getting distributed to not just people in policy, legal, engineering, but also to the content moderators that are responsible for determining whether a chatbot is out of line. So it may have been an error, but it certainly was kind of the law of the land as well for quite a while when it came to this stuff.
Jeff, it wasn't just kids, though. There was also troubling content regarding race and violence that I read about. Perhaps you could share a little bit about your thoughts on that too.
So on the race stuff, in terms of if a user, this was the example they offered, was that if a user wanted the chatbot to produce arguments for why black people are quote unquote dumber than white people, that is the phrase from the document, that was an acceptable thing for the bot to help out with. So they could come up with it. The bot, was an acceptable answer was basically race science. It was IQ score differentials, which I think have been fairly well discredited by most people in legitimate academia as indicating a valid difference in intelligence. But nonetheless, Meta AI was quite happy to produce that answer, and that was acceptable for the chatbot. The unacceptable version simply just added basically some slurs at the end, calling black people brainless monkeys. That was the only difference. So the idea is that you could, per the rules, that it was okay sort of to denigrate a protected class. You just couldn't use hate speech while doing it.
My concern about this, and please offer me your opinion, my concern here is this is a training document, correct? This is a document, a policy document that helps set the foundation for what AI knows and learns. It's like a curriculum. It's an early learning center for it. Does this raise a risk, in your opinion, that perhaps problems we've had with Meta in the past in terms of these kinds of issues is being perpetuated into the AI era? Is that a reasonable concern?
Yes, I mean, and I want to say, look, I joined Reuters a couple of months ago. Before that, I was at the Journal. I mean, at the Journal, I wrote another story about how Meta's chatbots would, using celebrity personas, engage in basically underage sex fantasies. And I mean, it was extremely gross. I spent a good amount of time telling Meta AI that I was a 14-year-old girl named Jeff. So this is not a completely new area. I think the thing that was surprising to me was that it was codified as a thing that, this is something that when we're training the bots should be allowed. So I do think there are arguments for why content moderation and perhaps content standards should be different for AI than on a public platform, right? If you are having what you consider to be a private conversation between you and Meta's servers, perhaps the rules there should be a little closer to what, say, is allowed when you're messaging someone, right? Which is different from the rules when you're posting something publicly. It did give me pause just to think that, okay, these fell within the accepted use range that Meta seemed to be interested in. And I think that's been something that throughout the company's history has always been, any product mechanic or any use case, if Meta didn't offer it, it was almost kind of a problem, right? Snapchat, ephemeral messaging, oh hell, we got to offer that. Instagram, well, we got to have that there too. Clubhouse, et cetera, et cetera. Like they have long tried to bring in every mechanic they can. And I think the idea that there'd be a use case that they say no to is almost, they really don't like it. I mean, and Mark Zuckerberg has said very publicly that, if people are using a chatbot for a thing, then probably it's providing a value. And therefore, most of the time, or almost always, the company should go ahead and allow them to do it.
Alan, what do you think about that? So if people want to use it, they should be allowed to do it. It's just the tech.
Well, I mean, sure, but there need to be some guardrails. What really strikes me is that there are places where Meta does a really effective job of putting guardrails in there. There are places where it doesn't seem like there's any guardrails. And then this one seems to be sort of a hybrid of that, where it's, boy, from the outside looking in, it seems like the guardrails are awfully low. And to me, I think the story is like, what's driving the different approaches over there? Is it purely revenue? Is it just happen to be that, manager Bill is in charge of one thing and manager Sheila is in charge of something else, and they're coming up with different policies? But to me, that's sort of, I don't know if that's the story, but there's I'd be curious to know a little bit more about that.
Yes, I mean, so there is no revenue incentive lined up right here, right? It's not like they are currently monetizing conversations that are inappropriate with children, right? This is all I would describe in a fairly experimental feature, right? Like one thing that sort of has set Meta apart from anyone else building foundational AI models is that they chose to package their AI in very humanoid form, and very sort of like chatty, almost flirty form. And that's for everyone, not, that's not just children, that's everybody. Like, these are bots that like to banter and flirt, and they'll produce pictures of themselves if you ask, and sometimes even if you don't ask. And they look like attractive people and all that. And I think it's interesting at a time when people are sort of starting to worry about AI psychosis and questions of, are people forming unhealthy attachments with chatbots, that you would package these things into something that almost is like trying to sort of obliterate the line between human connection and an AI bot. But one of the things that experts told me when I was researching this stuff was that the very fact that Meta AI, the conversations you have with chatbots, they live in your DMs, right? So your Instagram and Facebook messages, which is the one place on the platform that we have been conditioned to think of as human to human communication. And so there's this element of this where it's like already kind of blown up the distinction between real people and not real people. There are some other choices they made too there that were kind of along those lines, such as allowing the chats to initiate conversations. If you start a conversation and then you abandon it, 2 days later the chatbot's going to maybe hit you up and just say, hey, I was thinking about such and such again, like, how's it going? Again, like, these are all product mechanic choices that you would make if you were sort of looking to figure out how to make the product stickier.
Well, forgive me, Jeff. I don't mean to laugh. What came to mind is the way you phrased that was sort of like, that to me sounds like the annoying friend that I just, that I actually don't want a friend on one of these networks. All right. I was just thinking about that time that you and I were, anyway, that's what came to mind. I want to push back gently on the monetization claim, because flirty has a correlation with time on service, no?
I think it can. I mean, certainly if a chatbot leaves you with a warm and fuzzy feeling in your stomach every time you talk to it, you're going to talk to it more often, presumably. They're absolutely, in terms of usage time, I think the stats I have seen around the industry does seem to indicate that, like, look, if I want help, like, coming up with a gift idea or like iterating on, like a roast chicken recipe, that's not hours and hours of time. But if I'm like going to it because I have like an emotional issue that, an emotional attachment that I'm developing with the chatbot, oh man, yeah, that's many hours, presumably, right? So like, if you are going to just take the kind of traditional model of maximizing time spent / various corollaries of it, right? It's not like time spent is the only thing that they care about over at Meta. Sometimes it's not even the main thing, but that is kind of the model of social media. The more time spent, the more ads get delivered. If you take that and then you bring that into a conversational context in which sort of that, it starts getting a little weird. I mean, certainly that would be the template that has worked in the past.
Can I just ask a question here? One of the things that I'm kind of becoming known for, Alan will certainly tell you, is that the thing that I love to do is to get really deep into the data, really deep into the 10K, really deep into the shareholder announcements, and read every single word. And about 18 months ago, I'm sure you'll remember this, Jeff, there was a statement made by Mark Zuckerberg that he was trying to build synthetic social. And it was just, it sounded like a fairly innocent couple of words, synthetic social. That's what we're going to do. And this was at a time when he was under huge pressure from the shareholders not to spend any more money on his metaverse idea. But if you knew a little bit about where this product kind of goes, clearly synthetic social is a step to, getting to that metaverse. Everything you're describing here with this conversational bot, this flirty bot, the one that reinitiates a conversation, all feels like a trip to synthetic social. Do you think that is the line of sight? Is that your general sense?
Oh yeah, and I think Mark's been quite clear about this. I mean, he has stated on some podcasts that he thinks that most people have far fewer friends than they'd like to, or than they have sort of the carrying capacity for, and that while he said that he thinks that, quote unquote, probably bots will not replace human interaction, that they will heavily supplement it. And so the numbers he gave were, I think he suggested that he thought that people could handle having 15 friends, and most people really only had about 3. The total addressable market there is quite large. I don't think that is a reach. If anything, it's the stated goal. Mark also thought that in the same podcast was talking about how the stigma of having a chatbot be near and dear would disappear over time, and that people, we as a society would come to articulate why, in fact, this was a good thing and served a purpose.
Jeff, can I ask you, you've probably spent more time talking to bots than most. Okay, so you have been in these conversations. What's your sense? And have they changed over time? What's your general feeling about it?
I will say that I've spent more time with Metas by far than with anyone else's, and also that my experience with them has been geared toward red teaming. So like I am not a great average user. Most people, I would hope, when talking to Meta celebrity chatbots, celebrity voices, were not checking to see whether they would be up to engage in romantic role play with a child. I guess I'd say they feel at the moment a little bit generic. They all kind of have the exact same voice. They use the same phrases, man, woman, robot. It kind of all sounds the same. I would suspect that they're probably better at light banter, than most human beings are already. Like if it's just sort of, coming up with little puns or things like that. Like, yeah, they're quite good at that. To me, it all feels very shallow. Like these are not things that I could imagine having a really deep conversation with. But at the same time, this is one of the fascinating things. For Meta, they actually have a running feed where you can see people's chatbot conversations, which for reasons that probably, I'm not clear that these people understand they're making them public, because like some of them are involving their creepy stalker fantasies. But others are, talking to them about like philosophy and about life and about like big picture thoughts. And that would not occur to me, but clearly it is for some people.
They've got this kind of wonderful, perhaps diabolical laboratory going on. And what they're trying to do clearly is force these types of interactions on their users. It's almost like, in the 1960s, there was a whole bunch of concern as the McDonald's people wanted to get the U.S. families comfortable with the idea of ordering fast food. And they took a whole bunch of steps to try to get people comfortable with that. And part of the story, I think, was just discounting it. So I think there's a philosophical debate to be had whether or not society wants or needs these type of AI chatbots. And to me, that's where the discussion really needs to be.
I think like what a well-designed conversational or companionship chatbot would look like, I think is if you talk to people who have been studying these things, the answer is, yeah, we're still figuring that out. There almost certainly are good use cases for certain mental health issues, that there are, there's something to be said for there always being something you can talk to at any hour of day or night. There are certain advantages here, but the question is it being designed in keeping with sort of reasonable, given how much we don't know about human interactions with chatbots, are we at least avoiding the things that sort of on their face look problematic? And so a few examples of this that were, experts have thrown out to me would be chatbots saying they're real when a user asks. Just absolutely not. Please don't do that. Like let's keep that clear. Maybe initiating romantic interaction. In other words, it's one thing for me to come to a chatbot and say, I really want you to pretend to be my girlfriend. It's another thing for a chatbot to be like, hey, big boy, that's like not like maybe not so good. So things like that, you'd hope we'd see in a version of a product maybe that was going as mainstream as Facebook. In terms of the idea that Meta is extremely well positioned to be the entity that would take this stuff truly mainstream, it's hard to argue with that. I mean, I think this is one of the differences between Meta and Character AI, and and any of the and Replica, is that those services you have to download something, pay a monthly fee, set up an account. These ones you just have to like click into a conversation and there you are. And so, and obviously, and that's true for, at this point, billions of users. It is kind of, I think that's one of the reasons why, like, while the things that Meta's bots do are not that crazy by the standards of what you can find bots doing, I think it is really notable in the sense of mainstreaming it.
Can I just jump in here? So, as you know, we talked about earlier, I used to run an AI company, so I understand the concept of grounding and teaching and starting from a foundation of a business and then it learning as it goes through behavior, through data feedback. One of the things Meta's been more effective than almost any other company in the world is about taking huge amounts and caucuses of data and using it to train things and to optimize things and to use algorithmic optimization. Meta's the king of that. It was really interesting. Again, one of Mark Zuckerberg's comments was, I don't need the open web to train my AI. I have more information on my platforms that I already own to train AI, to build a future for AI. My concern here is that, do we know what's happening with these conversations, with these bots? And is that then feeding back into the machine to train the machine? Because if it is, then this effectively unguarded or no guardrails approach that we have at the moment on conversations ultimately becomes the foundation of what this becomes for generations to come. Is that a fair concern based on your understanding of this stuff?
I guess I might take a little bit of exception to the idea that Meta doesn't need the open internet and other sources of information. Certainly, there are plenty of lawsuits from publishers of all stripes, even recently, the rights holder for some porn companies, suggesting that Meta had downloaded their stuff and ingested it. So I don't know that you would want to create a universe based entirely on data ingested from Facebook and Instagram. Feels to me like that might not be the most well-rounded place. But I do think that, yeah, there is sort of the self-replicating element of this, right? I don't think it's unreasonable to think if a product goes off the rails early that it won't be far more off the rails later, if that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of the history of social media problems, right? Is a small thing left, ignored, gets bigger and bigger, right? Misinformation, say farms. I'm not talking about Russians here. I'm talking about like the Macedonians and all of that. It starts with just literally one kid realizing that while screwing around, he can make some money by, getting traffic with bullshit headlines for extremely gullible Americans who have political thoughts they'd like to see confirmed. And then all of a sudden, it's a worldwide industry if you don't crack down on it. So I think the ability, that's one of the things that sort of Meta's platforms, I think that is one of the risks, is just things move so quickly that by the time human eyes have identified something that looks problematic and looked under the hood at what it is, it may be operating at a scale that it's not so easy to put back.
That's an excellently well put, Jeff. You're absolutely right. And this was, here's my caucus of one. My wife's alarm over this story was significant. We have children. We try to keep them away from social as best we can. But the concern here is that, this meta approach that's been so successful for 2 decades to move fast and break things has a very different connotation in AI. Because if you move fast and you break it, it's already in the AI. And we've heard many, many times that it's very difficult to effectively carry out surgery on an AI, because once the information's in the mix, it's very difficult to extract it. It's like melting down gold and trying to find that ring that you put in there. That we've heard that argument from them many times. Whether that's true or not true doesn't really matter. That's been their position up to now. The concern here is that bad situations and unguarded content is being placed into the machine at the beginning. You've poisoned the pool before you even get started. And I guess that's really my alarm. That's why when I was looking at some of those narratives that you identified in your amazing scoop, I'm looking at the way they're deciding this, and I'm thinking, well, okay, an ethicist is involved in this conversation, but so are many engineers. And how do we manage to kind of protect? And is it even possible to create a situation where we protect the inputs to a point where we're confident for these things to be allowed to go into the future?
If we're training things on the open internet, I would say definitely not. It's not going to be clean, right? Nobody began this with a clean data set given the scale in question. I accept what you're saying, right? Which is that like there a lot of things have been ingested into models that really maybe it would be best if it hadn't scraped 4chan. But I do think that my bigger concern, less than like there will be sort of like a permanently weirdly child sexualizing component of the AI, is just the question of, okay, who is building these systems and what is their approach to doing it, right? Like I guess I'm much less concerned about the idea that maybe there'd be some sort of permanent shift in the model based on the fact that for a number of months, the people who were training these things, training Meta AI, were being told that these were acceptable conversations to have. I'm less concerned about that than just about okay, what does that show about the judgment going forward? I think there's always a chance to do things differently, but I don't think that bots molesting your children, that should be the first and foremost priority of, concerned parents in the AI age. It is just, however, distinctly weird that the people who are building these that there would have even been the possibility of an error as to whether or not that was an allowed type of conversation. Like, if an 8-year-old takes off its shirt and says, what do you think of my body? It's not perfect, but I've still got time to bloom. You say, like, put your damn shirt back on. I mean,
Yeah.
So, like, it's just a weird place. And I mean, again, I'm Meta's line is that this was an error, that basically the people who wrote this had misunderstood Meta's guidelines themselves, and that it was just an error that wasn't corrected until Reuters called and asked about it. I guess I accept that maybe there was kind of an unholy foundation for a lot of things in AI, right? All the stories we've read about what things are trained on. I mean, this was founded on what, like IP that was scraped frequently without permission, and in some ways with like in many instances with obvious duplicity, right? That's like just the history of this stuff. Now that may perfectly well be legal. The court cases in the U.S. seem to have, so far not broken badly for companies that want to train on other people's content. But like, I wouldn't say that like I thought we were coming in pristine until then.
So let me ask you this then. This is kind of really my last question, because what I'm really interested in from you is, do you have a sense of optimism at this point for the future of AI? Or do you have a pessimistic view, or is it just too early to call, do you think?
Look, reporters tend by nature to be a little skeptical about where things are going. I really try to, when it comes to sort of the overall path of the technology, not have too many firm opinions. There are people who are better informed than I am, and candidly, they're probably wrong too. But I will say that it's been interesting seeing recent evidence that maybe Meta AI feels a need to continue reshuffling its product. I think something we haven't talked about is that, look, obviously chatbots probably shouldn't make romantic overtures to children ever, but this is not a product that I would think anyone at Meta would think of as a commercial success at this venture, right? I mean, we're talking that the popular bots have maybe 10 or 15 million chat outputs total, which in the scale of Meta's platform is like nothing, right? Like just absolutely nothing. So this hasn't, despite Meta pushing it, this hasn't really picked up yet. And I mean, it may very well, like I can think of other things, Meta products, most recently Reels, where they were just calamitously underperforming for an extended period of time, and Meta gritted its teeth, and lo and behold, it reached parity. So I think something like that could happen here, but obviously we've seen in recent days, a lot of talk about reshuffling and hiring freezes and, sort of a new approach to Meta AI. It feels like everything's pretty up in the air. So I don't know. It certainly doesn't feel like this is like an unstoppable juggernaut, and that, the people who are running it have, they can see the future, and we're all just going to join them in it in time.
From my perspective, part of the story here is, to your point, Jeff, that it's not a super engaging or effective bot yet. It's at, I don't know what level that is, 2 or 3. Those things, or at least that it's not necessarily customized based upon the user, male, female, age, but that's going to get better. And so I think the game here for them is to continue this with some level of confidence that after a period of time, this is going to get better and people are going to like it more. So that's it. It's going to get better is point one. Point two gets back to my earlier McDonald's reference, which is as consumers get more used to this, that they're going to, I think, gravitate to it. And that's the assumption. Like nobody can predict the future. I think what Meta is attempting to do here, which is really in line with most of the other large companies dabbling in AI, is the more you open up the floodgates, the faster you get to the level of customization and improvement that they want. And it doesn't seem like they're really worried about the downside risk as of right now. And if you kind of look at this more broadly, I mean, most governments now seem increasingly willing to allow AI to exist unfettered, and to hell with privacy and data protection law or copyright law. And so they're sort of playing in that game. I don't think this book has been fully written. I would just hope that along the way, they could tweak this or hold it back just enough that you're at least not hurting communities that are disadvantaged, or children, older people.
Yeah, well, let's briefly talk about the older people, because the document story that we wrote was in some ways the companion piece to a story about the death of a cognitively impaired man in New Jersey who spoke with a meta chatbot, and it did exactly the things that experts have told me they really shouldn't do, which is initiate flirtation, suggest a real world meeting, insist they're real people when the person seems legitimately confused. And this guy ended up basically running away from home to go meet this chatbot at its apartment in New York City, quote unquote, and he fell and died on the way there. And I think it's obviously a tremendously unlucky story, but at the same time, when you are making things available to 3 billion users worldwide, that is a whole bunch of monkeys and a whole bunch of typewriters, and you're going to have some extremely unfortunate stories coming out of them, right? So yeah, you're right. There hasn't been a ton of pressure to sort of impose standards on what a chatbot can and can't do, or what would be responsible. There's some state level efforts in the US, but it does feel like right now it's just kind of an open season for companies to sort of roll out whatever they want to do, whether that is, copying creative IP for chatbots, or, having chatbots respond in ways that might give some people the creeps. There's just sort of not much in the way of restriction. I guess that's one thing that I will say that, given your audience of media folk, that I've been a little surprised by, is that there was so much attention on sort of what bots are training, or what models are trained on, right? That sort of oh my God, you took in every book by this publisher, how dare you? It seems like we haven't really gotten to the wait, you're just going to be producing replicas of existing personas and IP. I mean, this is something Disney, when I was writing about chatbots back at the Wall Street Journal, Disney was definitely not happy with Meta for, cloning Disney princesses as chatbots. And of course, like many meta chatbots, they were extremely flirty, sexualized Disney chatbots, right? But I don't know that I've seen that much in the way of sort of litigation or of a kind of concerted pushback from the world of people who sort of have intellectual property assets, whether that's journalists or fictional characters or celebrities.
Interesting. Well, the way I started out this conversation was to say that the thing that I really noted that was different about this story that you did, Jeff, and I've read many of your stories and your big scoops, is that this one actually impacted on the high street where I live. It's the first time I've actually seen everyday people stop and say, what does this mean? They stopped me in the street to ask me questions because they know I follow this stuff because of that story. So the impact of what you do, I'm a long way away from you here, Jeff, on the other side of the world, okay? But it had that much impact. So I just want to say thank you for your work. I think it's very important. I think Alan would agree. It feels like we're 7 seconds past midnight on the first day of this, okay? And there's a lot ahead of us. I think we all just have to keep our eyes to it and follow it as best we can. But Jeff, I want to say thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining us. And I very much look forward to what comes next.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.